me, and she would tell me stories about her time in Barbados. And I loved it. I loved all the stories. So from the time I could read, I just wanted to devour stories. I wanted to read more and more and more. But my dad had some very peculiar ideas. And one of his peculiar ideas was that he thought fiction was a complete and utter waste of time. Now, at home we had a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, as most black families and we had lots of books on, non-fiction books, like books on nature, books on space and the universe and animals and all the rest of it. And I loved reading those, but I also loved storybooks. But my dad's attitude was, but it's not real, it's not true, you need to live in the real world. And he said, you're never going to learn anything from a fiction book, so he refused to give me any money to buy fiction books. So as a consequence, my mum took me to a library when I was 6 or 7, and then from the time I was 7, I would make myself a packed lunch, and I'd say, right, see you later, Mum, and she'd say, where are you going? And I'd say, I'm off to the library. She'd go, okay, see you later. So off I go from 7, 8, you know, and I'd stay there all day, reading as many books as I could, and then when we were chucking people out, I would take out as many books as I could and try and make them last for the following Saturday. I did that from the time I was 7 to the time I was 14, when I had my first Saturday job at the British Home Schools in Peckham.
Yeah, I remember that.
Start buying books for myself. I didn't actually go into a bookshop until I was 14. But I was always down my local library, and in all those years, and all those thousands and thousands of books I read at my local library, I didn't read a single book that featured a black child like me. Not one. And in fact, the first time I read a book that featured a black character was when I was 22, and it was The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, and before that I had never read a book that featured black characters, or that had been written by a black author. And that's a hell of an age to get to actually read books that, by people who are kind of like yourself. And so when I was kind of 7, 8, because I loved reading, I decided I wanted to be an English teacher. And that was that, and I wanted to go into schools and infuse kids about reading the same way my English teachers were doing for me. And then when I did my O-levels, I did 10 O-levels, and I was doing my A-levels, my career teacher said to me, okay, Mallorie, what do you want to do? And I had it all figured out. I said, I want to go to Goldsmiths College, and I want to get to an English and drama degree, and I want to be an English teacher at the end of it. And she looked at me and she said, well, black people don't become teachers. She said, why don't you be a secretary instead? And I looked at her and I said, I don't want to be a secretary. No offense to secretary, so that's not what I wanted to do. I said, I don't want to be a secretary. I want to be an English teacher. She said, well, I'm sorry, black people don't do that. And she said, I'll tell you what. She said, I'll give you a reference to do business studies at Poly, but I'm not giving you a reference to go to university. And I looked at her, she could obviously see from my face that I was really upset. And she said, and besides, I don't think you're going to get your English A-level. Now, I'd never failed an English exam in my life. So I remember looking at her and just thinking, oh, I'll show you, you old cow. Anything actually made me work harder. I'm not going to fail this. But because she refused to give me a reference, I ended up going to doing business studies in Huddersfield Poly. And I knew before I even read that it was a mistake, because, you know, and I'd be sitting in an economics lecture, and the lecturer would be going on about price elasticities and inelasticities, whatever, and I'd be staring out the window thinking, oh, that cow looks like a terrier. I just daydreaming, and so it was a total loss. But halfway through the first term, I was rushed to hospital, and I had my appendix taken out. And then I had to come back down to London to recuperate, so then I gave up my place. I thought, well, I don't want to do business studies anyway, to see. But by then I had my A-level results. So I applied to Goldsmiths, and I got in. And then, you know, and the thing is, I decided I was going to work for a year. Let me put this thing down. And I decided I was going to work for a year, make some money, and then go to Goldsmiths. And I started working at a software house. And I'd never even touched a computer before that, and I got hooked. And so I gave up my place at Goldsmiths, so I never did go to Goldsmiths. And I stayed in computing for 10 years. But then when I was in my mid-20s, I wanted to do something that I felt was more creative. I had enough of computing. And I thought, I don't want to spend the rest of my life staring at a computer screen. So what do I do now? I stare at a computer screen. It's different because I love it. But I decided I wanted to do something more creative. And from the time I was 7 or 8, I was still writing stories and poems for my own amusement. And I thought, oh, actually, you know, maybe I could get some of these published. And the way it came about was I was looking for something more creative to do, something a bit more fulfilling. And by that time, I was working for Reuters, and I was a database manager, and I was flying around the world, and I had my company car and whatever, and I was so miserable. I hated it. I was so miserable. And it taught me a lesson, you know, that money isn't everything. And I certainly wasn't. And so I kind of started acting classes, and I was a deadlock. Rubbish. Like, you know, when we had improvisations, when we had to do improvisations, the tutor would go, "Okay, friends, who wants to go next?" And they'd all go, "Valerie, I'll go." And I was sitting in the chair going, "Oh my God, don't choose me." I tried very much, I tried to make myself look as small as possible. But we all had to do it. And what I found very quickly is when she said, "Okay, let's do some improvisation around the fact you and your partner, you know something that they don't, and you're trying to find the best way to tell them something quite devastating to them." And I was always the one who'd come up with the scenarios and say, "Well, how about we try this or whatever?" And then when we were working in groups, I was always the one who came up with the ideas until sort of very quickly people would say, "Oh, Malorie, what do you think we should do? What do you think we should do?" So I loved coming up with the ideas, but I just hated acting them out. And at the end of this acting course, the tutor took me to one side and she said, "Malorie," she said, "you come up with some really good ideas. Have you ever thought of writing some of these down?" Which was her polite way of saying, "You're not an actress, love." But you know what, I thought, actually, you know, I still was writing. I thought, oh, maybe I could get some of these published. So I wrote my first story and I sent it off to a publisher, and they wrote back to me and they said, "Dear Laureate Blackman." No, thank you. So I had a cry and looked about the house. I thought, okay, if they don't want it, I'll send it to someone else. So I sent it off to a second publisher. And they wrote back to me and they said, "Dear Laureate Blackman." No, thank you. So I thought, okay, that's enough for the third publisher. I wrote another story and I sent that off as well. And they both wrote back to me and they said, "Dear Laureate Blackman." No, thank you. So does anyone want to have a guess how many rejection letters I had before somebody said yes? 17. 17? I wish. Higher. 20. 20, higher. 50. 50, higher. 80. Very good. You're really close. I got 82 rejection letters before somebody said yes. And the 82 rejection letters were for about 8 or 9 different books. And every time I heard the postman, I'd go charging down the stairs, and I'd tear open the letter, and he always said, "Dear Malorie Blackman." "No, thank you." And this one time I heard the postman, and I went charging down the stairs, and I tore open the letter, and it said, "Dear Malorie Blackman, we would love to publish your story." And I stood there and I went, so happy. And my husband said, "John, what's the matter? What's the matter?" I can't even breathe. But, you know, I was so good. And even now when the publishers are going to watch one of my stories, I still get so chuffed about it. So that was my first one, and it came out in November 1990 when I was 28. You can work out how old I am. But before, I was writing kind of picture books and short and kind of early readers and so on. My first novel, but it was my 5th book, was Hacker. And I'll tell you how Hacker came about. I sat down on my computer and I thought, I'm going to see if I can write a novel. So I went, Hacker, chapter 1, type. And then 8 months later I put in the end, and I thought, oh, I've written my first novel. And it was 250 pages, and it was 50,000 words, and I was so thrilled, and I went through it correcting for typos and so on, and then I sent it straight off to Transworld Publishers, who became Random House. And they wrote back to me and they said, "Dear Laureate Blackman, could you come in to talk about your book, Hacker?" And I thought, yes, they're going to publish my story. I was so thrilled. But not quite. Because I went in to see them and they said, "Well, Malorie, we really liked your writing, but we felt the end of your story had a few problems." So I thought, well, that's all right, that's cool, I can fix that. So they were telling me why the end of my story had a few problems, and I was making loads and loads. And then they said, "We felt the beginning didn't quite work." Okay. So I'm making more notes, the beginning didn't work. And then they said, "We felt you needed to work on the middle." And the original story was about a girl who swapped personalities with her computer, would you believe? And so I came out of that meeting thinking, what did they invite me in for? They didn't like the beginning, the middle, or the end. But you know what? I went home and I sat down and I read through it. And they were absolutely right. There were holes in that plot you could have given a bus through. So I broke my heart. But I took the old 250 pages and I put them in a bin. And I started again from scratch. And I kept the title, because that's the only thing they hadn't said anything about. And I completely changed the story, so I made it about a girl called Vicky and her brother Gibb, and their dad works in the bank, and £1 million of the bank's money goes missing, and it's found in their dad's bank account. So, of course, he's arrested because he's accused of embezzling and kind of taking money from the bank. And they know their dad didn't do it. Their dad's not a thief. So they hack into the bank's computer to try and find out who took the money and why. And when I first started writing, people would say, write what you know about. Now, and I knew computing. So my first few books like Hacker and Dangerous Reality and Antidote were kind of technological thrillers. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's why we have imagination. So I think you should write what you care about. And I think if you don't know about something, then you make sure you do your research and you get your facts straight. But I do think that my advice to anyone who wants to write is write what you care about. Write about something that makes you really angry or makes you really happy or sad or something that moves you really deeply. And I think, well, that's the way I found has worked for me. So Hacker, I sat down, and what I did this time though was I actually did a synopsis of my full story, the one I just told you. I did a chapter breakdown, so I wrote a paragraph to say what was going to happen in every chapter. I did a biography of all my major characters to say what kind of food they like, what was their favourite food, what kind of music were they into, not just what they looked like, but what their characters were like. And I did that for all my major characters, and then I sat down to write it, and then I printed it off, and I went through it trying to get it as good as I could, and printed it off again, and did that, and I did that about 8 or 9 times before I sent it off. And then I sent it to Transworld, and they said, we love this, we'll publish this. And I'm really glad that I didn't give up, actually, because it won the Young Telegraph Children's Book of the Year Award, and it won the W.H. Smith Children's Book of the Year Award. And when I won the W.H. Smith Children's Book of the Year Award, I got a cheque for £5,000. So we had a lovely holiday in Barbados. So that was Hacker, and as I said, it was my first book, but my first novel. And after that, I just love writing novels. I love kind of getting to grips with it, and sort of having not that extra space to write sort of what's happening to my characters, etc. But it taught me a lesson, because I thought I'm never going to waste another sort of 8 months, 9 months, a year writing something that doesn't work, so I always pan them out first. So that's how I became a writer. And I'm just doing a sequel to Boys Don't Cry, and that is my 61st book. That will be my 61st book. But I can't read them. Counting after the 50th one. And in fact, Noughts and Crosses, which is the book I'm best known for, was my 50th book. And how that came about was because from the time I started writing, I was always getting criticised for not writing about racism. As if as a black author, that was the only thing I was qualified to write about. It used to really get on my nerves. So I kind of thought, well, you know what? I want to write about all the books I'd love to have read as a child that had nothing to do with race. And that's, and that's how, as I said, Hacker came about, and all the other ones, Thief and Pig-Heart Boy. For example, Pig-Heart Boy came about because I read a newspaper article where a doctor was saying that we have to start using animal organs because there's such a shortage of human donors. Now, can I just ask, how many people here, if you needed a kidney transplant, God forbid, how many people here don't like the idea of having it from an animal? Hands up. Who doesn't like that idea of having it from an animal? Hands down. Hands up those of you who don't mind the idea of having it from an animal. Hands down. But you know what? That's what I try and do in my books. I don't pretend to have any answers. I don't have answers, but I like to ask questions. And I think that my dad said I'd never learn anything from fiction. He was so wrong, because I think I learned more about other people and our similarities and our differences. I learned empathy. I learned to see through the eyes of others from reading fiction books. And what I like to do in my books, as I said, is ask questions and raise topics for debate. And so that's how Pig-Heart Boy came about, because it's Cameron had to make a choice as to whether or not he's going to have a pig heart put inside of him. They have a pig heart transplant. And he does. He spares his best friend to secrecy, but his best friend is so upset he tells his dad, and then his dad tells the story to the newspapers, and now suddenly everybody knows their business, and they've got the first stamps on their doorstep. And what surprises Cameron is he thought his life would go back to normal when he had the heart transplant. But there are a number of his friends who don't want to be close to him anymore because they're afraid they might catch something and so on. So it totally changes his life. And so, and I don't say in the book whether it's right or wrong. So the readers kind of make up their own mind as to whether or not they would do that. As far as noughts and crosses is concerned, that came about because there were a number of things that happened to me in my childhood which I thought I had dealt with, but all I'd done is I'd buried them. And then around the time of the Stephen Lawrence case, I remember seeing a dramatisation of the way that Stephen Lawrence's parents were treated by the police. And I was so angry, and the story had been buzzing around in my head for a while, but I just sat down and I thought, right, now I'm going to write about racism, but I'm going to do it my way. And originally I've been playing around with the idea of writing a story about slavery, and every time I spoke to my friends, be they white, black, Asian, whatever, the response was underwhelming, to say the least. It was kind of, oh, what do you want to write about that? It's so painful, it's such a painful topic. Oh, what do you want to write about that for? It's so long ago. And it was fascinating how many of my friends kind of felt they knew what was going to be in the book before I'd even written a word. And so I thought, okay, let me see, what can I do to kind of play about with their assumptions? And I thought, okay, let me do this. So I'm going to turn it on its head. So that it's a kind of alternate Britain, but the minority are white people and the majority are black people. And it's kind of the story of Callum, who's a North, and Seppi, who's a Cross. And North's a white and Cross is a black, for those who haven't read the story. And again, it was kind of, I wanted to do it from both points of view, because again, I was trying to present a society where both Callum and Seppi are just trying to kind of be together and trying to kind of have a future, and everyone's telling them that they shouldn't be friends and so on. And that, when people say to me, are you in any of your books? I'd always say no, no way. But of all the characters I've created, I think Callum's personality is probably closest to my own, because a number of the things that Callum goes through are actually true and happen to me. Things like being in a history lesson and saying to my history teacher, how come we never talk about black scientists and achievers and inventors? She said, because there aren't any. And I didn't know any, but I couldn't come back at her. I didn't learn about black scientists and inventors, etc., until I was in my 20s. And so I thought, I'm sure it's not right, there's got to be some, but again, I had Callum in the book asking that very same question of his history teacher and getting the same response. There's a scene in the book where Callum is travelling with Seppi, first class on a train, and the ticket inspector accused him of stealing the ticket, and that happened to me. First time I travelled first class, the ticket inspector accused me of stealing the ticket. And so, you know, things like that were, as I said, I thought I dealt with stuff, but when I was writing that book, I realised I hadn't, I just buried it. But actually writing that book allowed me to kind of let some stuff go. So it was very, I think actually writing probably saved my sanity. It's a brilliant way. I mean, when my parents split up when I was 13, I felt there was no one I could talk to about it. And so I started keeping a diary, and I'd write poems trying to express how I was feeling. And it was a brilliant way. I didn't realise it at the time, but I was kind of getting into that habit of writing every day. But it also meant that I wasn't afraid to write real thoughts and real feelings down. And I think that actually served me when I started writing, actually keeping that diary. And I kept the diary for about 3-4 years, never showed it to anyone. But it kind of helped me through that time, and it also kind of, as I said, didn't make me afraid to kind of be real and be truthful in the book. Because I read something that said that someone was saying that they reckoned that every character an author creates is part of them. And there's some really nasty characters in the Northern Brothers, like Callum's brother Jude. And in Knife Edge, the sequel to it, he does something really horrific. And I remember I was writing that bit, and a chill went up and down my spine. And I thought, oh my God, should I write this? It's a bit much. And I thought, no, you can't change it. This is what he does. And so I carried on. But the idea of Jude being a part of my character, I thought, oh God, I hope not. But it's brilliant. For me, it's a really wonderful way of kind of, you know, dealing with some stuff, letting my imagination go wherever it wants to. I mean, I was always being told off at school for having too much imagination and daydreaming. It just makes me laugh now, but that's how I make a living. Anyway, I'll just shut up. So let's have some people can ask some questions.
I'll kick off with a question, and then we'll put it over.